Lawyers of Reddit, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why? Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit. I worked at a civil firm and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many, many people. Trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me the story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip: kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating, and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted, I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." On the regular. Honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly, never worked alone, by the time I was done working with them I considered it a small victory. This was a main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now. Family lawyer here associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom. But didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked, child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Oh yes. A high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit BC she was going to have to pay $60/month in child support. She wanted a recalculation and I was praying she would have to pay more. I'm a law student, but the place I worked at last summer was a civil litigation firm with one partner who did mostly criminal defense. None of the associate attorneys liked getting assignments from that partner, since none of them had really signed on to do criminal defense work. Anyways, one associate ended up having to write an appeal for a guy who was convicted of raping and murdering his young child. There was a serious constitutional violation that the appeal was based on, but realistically the entire office was hoping the appeal would be denied, including the associate who got stuck writing it. Edit: don't know what happened, not gonna say where it was, the associate tried his best, no one got disbarred, yes it sucked to work on it knowing the guy was guilty. I'm a divorce attorney. There are several people I've represented who aren't dangerous but are pretty shitty parents. It's hard to help them fight for their kids without also fighting for them to be better parents. Fortunately, I live in a state where that kind of advice is allowed. Otherwise, I'd want many of my clients to lose. Public defender. Definitely yes. Raped his own children. This post applies to several people I've defended. Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it, that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. That's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute/lawsuit once you found arguments for the case. Not quite, but I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present. So it left me feeling weird. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction. To save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases I am rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. Met. You win some, you lose some. Or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because, reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole. A serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years, the client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with, that is worth $600K might be hers because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case. Not a lawyer. But I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One of them told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for murder and rape. The dude was apparently crazy as fuck and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained to a chair with a mask on. Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever God was listening, that he would fucking lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care, or hope they'll lose. For example, if you're a public defender, and you're defending some sort of rapist, pedophile, etc., you really hope they lose or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the shittiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a rapist and sadly many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution's side, there are sometimes pressures, from the public, victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this, or smaller cases where they're thinking this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose. Unless they're getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win. I take appointments representing complete shitbag parents who lose their kids to DCS. The system in my state is really set up to help these people, but almost always they're awful and the kids deserve better. Not always, but so often it's really demoralizing sometimes. Not me, but my mom had this case like 6 years ago where she had to defend a man who killed his ex-girlfriend's one-day-old baby. I remember my mom would come home every day and just cry. She's had a lot of cases where horrible things happen to kids and she's always been so afraid something would happen to my brother or me. It really took a toll on her. All the fucking time. Family law is awful. Yeah, sometimes. I get patents for clients. Sometimes, I feel like the client has no business getting this particular patent. Not an attorney, but I work for a state's county court judge. As a clerk I meet so many people, and unfortunately there are people who you start to recognize. We have some defendants who have 2, 3, and 4 cases. Needless to say, we are happy when they plead vs taking 2+ cases to trial. We also have defendants who are particularly needy, meaning non-compliant with pretrial supervision, picking up new cases, failing to appear, sovereign citizens, etc. While I really do try to stay impartial, it is hard to watch trials where people are blatantly guilty, so it's nice to see juries affirm that. You should read The Lincoln Lawyer. I'm an intern at a PD's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are asshole clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar. Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger-happy armed robbers, sexual predators, etc. The PDs fight like hell for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for currently who's looking at an anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm gonna do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot and am not terribly sad about it. I was just watching the O.J. trial on court TV and always wondered how those lawyers could work for him, knowing 100% he brutally beat and murdered Nicole Simpson. Regardless of how much he paid, I just don't understand how they could live with themselves. Immigration attorney, had a client sign up after having his visa cancelled as he was convicted for molesting his ex-partner's kid. I wasn't in a position in my firm to refuse clients because I'm a junior and senior attorneys would go nuts. We had multiple risk assessments since his offending, saying he was the lowest of low risk and testimony that he wasn't a pedophile. Got his visa back for him. Still don't know how I feel about it. I didn't want him to lose the case per se, I just wasn't expecting it to be successful. I represented a company when there was infighting among the partners. A few of the partners came to me with a plan to buy out another partner. However, this plan was essentially a way to fuck this person over. I'm not sure if they thought I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, but when I called them out on it, they owned it and said that their plan was to dupe him into taking an offer and then screwing him. I pushed for an amicable resolution, i.e., a fair deal, and they went along with that for a while. The partner they were trying to buy out was not willing to leave without negotiating, and my clients didn't want to hang around. They fired me and are now with someone else. I know the attorney they went to, and I can't imagine they're crossing the unethical line I wouldn't cross. The sad thing is that I really respected these folks, but they clearly did not have any respect for me or their partner. It was gross. Isn't this the type of question that a good lawyer would never answer? I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because, A, that is a fucking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth, B, he was a vet who was injured in combat, and, C, he was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My asshole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified. I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total. The judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. All the time. I do family and criminal law. Custody cases are the worst because an intense one means at least one of the parents isn't actually concerned about the well-being of the child, Ren. They just want to win. I will always represent my client and their interests, but it is certainly difficult some days. I worked for a firm that defended homeowners associations and primarily did default judgments against people who couldn't pay HOA dues. I was a debt collector. I hope I lost all my cases. I quit that job after 3 weeks. Defense attorney. Mix of retained clients and contract work with the state public defender's office when they have conflicts. All the time. Child sex defense where the evidence is overwhelming and the client wants a trial. Sometimes they want a trial because they are psychopaths, sometimes because they are so shamed they are in denial, and sometimes as a coping mechanism. It's easier to blame the victim, jury, cops, lawyers, and the judge than admit you fucked a child. My job isn't to like my client. Or to lie for them. It's to be the gatekeeper. If the state wants a human to die in prison, then they have to follow the law. The need to legally present their evidence, follow the rules of evidence, and prove every element of every offense. No matter the guilt of my client, fuck 'em if they don't prove their case. They have detectives, their own investigators, technology before trial, i.e. Celebrite and crime labs, technology at trial, smart boards, experts, etc., friendly former prosecutors as judges, material witness warrants, second chairs, law clerks, and public perception on their side. I wouldn't be surprised if my lawyer didn't really want to win my case. Keep in mind, defending someone doesn't always mean the difference between years in jail and free to go. Sometimes you're fighting to reduce a sentence or other terms of a conviction. Never. My personal ethics mean I must do anything and everything for my client, falling short of anything illegal or that could get me disbarred. I used to do criminal defense work and had a couple of clients I found to be very reprehensible, but I successfully was able to give them the best defense I could. I don't do any criminal defense work anymore, but not because of some of the reprehensible characters. I really didn't mind that. Just moved on to a different and better paying legal field. I broke my tibia real good once. Shattered it, to be precise.